It's Baschamania! Let me tell you something, brother. He gave us everything he had in him tonight. What you gonna do when Baschamania runs wild? Oh, it's gonna be a good one. And business just picked up here on the podcast. Oh, yeah.
All right, and we are on. Coach Sean McDermott, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Kind of feels like a vacation from quarantine. With you're in Buffalo, I'm in Rochester, so you're probably getting the same weather here. 70 degrees and sunny. You can't beat that.
Yeah, living on a tropical island here in New York.
And it's definitely got to be nice. It's a bit of a break. I mean, talk about being impacted by this quarantine. You had a virtual draft this year. Did you ever imagine you'd be part of a virtual draft when you signed on as a head coach?
Yeah, no way. I mean, it never even came close to crossing my mind. Interesting, but I think we've all learned some new things going through this.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was watching the Buffalo Bills Embedded on YouTube last night and getting kind of a behind-the-scenes glimpse of it. And it's funny. I was cracking up when Brandon Beane was being interviewed, and you jokingly interrupted to ask the question, can you talk about the athleticism of your head coach? And ironically, that's what I want to do. So you kind of spoke that into existence there.
Yeah.
So being a wrestling podcast, I want to dive into wrestling a bit. You started wrestling at just 4 years old. What got you started in the sport?
Yeah, my mom kind of sent my brother and I off. She was working, my dad was working at the time, and we were just driving her crazy, I think, driving both of them crazy, wrestling around our living room, all on the beds upstairs and falling off things, breaking things. And so I think my brother actually brought a little flyer home from school. He was a year or two ahead of me, and she said, yeah, go ahead and do this. And I don't think she knew what she was getting into.
And how early did you start playing football?
Yeah, I think I was 9 or 10 years old when I started football.
Wow. So were you leaning towards one sport or another, like heading into high school?
Yeah, I had a longer history of wrestling over the summers. Football, you don't really play year round, but wrestling, as we all know, tends to be sometimes a year-round sport.
And you got really good, but initially you had said that you burned out, and you were kind of thankful that you hit the reset button and got back on your game. After wrestling when you were starting at 4 years old and then kind of burning out early in high school, how did you hit that reset button?
Yeah, I mean, starting so early and then wrestling for so long, I did get burned out in about sixth grade, I think it was, and just needed a break. And so the reset button was just through rest. I took some time away from the sport, found out how much I missed it, how much I missed all the things that come with wrestling.
Yeah.
And then I discovered Foxcatchers at the time also down in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania.
Yep. And now after you had this rest, it speaks volume to the importance of rest. Afterwards, you hit this reset button, you transferred to LaSalle College High School, and then I believe you went 64-0 across 2 seasons. Is that correct? Becoming a 2-time national prep champ?
Yeah. I had really, really great coaches. Had 2 really good years, and that I think that was a result of just me getting stronger, more experience at Foxcatchers, and being around a great program at LaSalle. And then, just found kind of my niche with a couple moves that as I talk to people about wrestling and like football, as much as things have changed, they remain the same, right?
Yep.
If you get 1 or 2 moves that people have a hard time stopping, you can be lethal.
And you were only taken down once over those 2 years, right?
Yeah,
I heard you say that.
That bothers me. It bothers me to this day.
What was the takedown? Do you remember?
Huh?
What was the takedown? Do you remember?
You know what? I think I relaxed. That's what I relaxed. I got sloppy. It was in the semis of my senior year of the national preps, and I think I just got sloppy and let my defense down.
And when you have such a good wrestling career, I mean, 2 undefeated seasons in a row, what ultimately made you go down the path of football? Because weren't you exploring wrestling in college?
I was, yeah. I think just more than anything, I grew up obviously playing both sports. My dad was a football coach, high school and college football coach, and I just felt like that was my calling at the time. But I was probably honestly a better wrestler, more decorated wrestler than I was a decorated football player. But that's kind of the path the good Lord he called me to, really.
For sure. And what do you think wrestling has taught you?
No, man, where do you want to start? I think the biggest, I just think wrestling is you learn so many lessons about life through wrestling, on the mat, off the mat. I think the biggest thing, work ethic. I loved being able to control. I think wrestling's a sport where you can really control a lot of the controllables. You can control a lot of the outcome, because it's you versus the opponent, and very few times does the official get involved.
Yeah.
And so really there's no one to blame other than yourself when you don't wrestle well. And so I love the training, knowing that when I was training that my opponent wasn't training. I love the mental toughness part of it. I think that I learned that early on,
Yep.
just being around that part. And so those are things that I've carried with me the rest of my life to this point, and in my coaching career now.
And for the wrestling people who are listening who might not know, Brandon Beane is the Bills GM, and he has described you as the most disciplined person he knows. Would you credit a lot of that to wrestling?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's a disciplined sport. That's the other piece that I love about it. I had a chance to go to West Point coming out of college, to play football there at Army, and that's really the way. That's kind of my personality that way. But
Yeah.
I kind of decided against it, and chose William and Mary, which was a great decision. But I still have some regrets from time to time about that decision. But that it goes back to the discipline. You've got to be disciplined. If you're a wrestler and you're not disciplined, or better said, if you're trying to be elite in anything and you're not disciplined, you're going to have a hard time.
And this year, 4 out of the 6, I believe it was 4 out of the 6 linemen drafted first in the draft wrestled in high school. I mean, as a head coach, how important do you think wrestling is to help a football career?
Well, it's huge. A lot of people, or I should say, I even took it for granted that football players, that they understand leverage, that they understand changing levels, and that low man wins and hand fighting wins. And I guess I just assumed that everyone knows those skills, but when you grow up around it, everyone does know those skills.
Yeah, and even when you're not good, like I wrestled in middle school and high school, and I was never any good. Never any good. But the lessons you learned, the dedication, the commitment. I remember vividly a middle school practice where my JV coach was like, "You're doing more on this Saturday by 9:30 than most people do all day." Like it teaches you so much, whether you're good or not, or whether you go on to be an Olympic champ or successful in business or in another sport. It's wild. And you can never really walk away from this sport. It's one of those things that when it bites, when it pulls you in, you get that bite and you're in. And now I've heard you've taught Brandon Beane's son how to wrestle. Is that true?
Well, I started when we were down in Carolina together, in Charlotte, when we both worked for the Panthers. His son was getting into wrestling a little bit. I think he now plays hoops, but yeah. So I've got a mat that I laid out and brought his son over, and took a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday morning and spent a couple hours of just trying to lay a little bit of the fundamentals down for him. Yeah.
And did you bring that wrestling mat to Buffalo? Is it still set up at your house?
Oh yeah, it's still here. Yeah.
Do you get on it? You have a son who wrestles, right?
Well, he did, and now he's a hooper also.
Okay.
I found, I think the thing that really got me into wrestling was my brother. When you're young, to have friends that do it, to have a brother in my case that did it, certainly helped get me in and just gave me a training partner to start off with.
Yeah. And it's also something that, it sounds like you have that admiration and respect for wrestlers. And, a friend of mine who we were talking before this, Jordan Burroughs, I love Jordan, great guy, even better family, wife, kids. You had him come speak at training camp a few years ago, which, by the way, I'm thankful for, because when he's in town, we usually get together. So Lauren and him texted me and said, "Hey, we're going to be going to the Bills training camp. Let's grab lunch after." So it's a great excuse for us to get lunch. So thank you for that. But what led you to wanting him to come speak at the training camp?
Yeah, I mean, he's connected through another member of his family with the Bills first and foremost. But just, listen, this is a guy that has achieved such greatness in his sport, and I know what comes with it, right? I know wrestling enough, not at that level, but I know enough of what wrestling brings and what it takes to win and wrestling and win at that level. That I felt like those were life skills and traits that our players can learn from because listen, again, going back to what I said before, what makes people successful in sports, regardless of sport, is there's a lot of carryover between those sports. So those traits carry over from one sport to the next, and in life, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. And I know I've only seen one interview where you talk about wrestling, and that was one from 2017, which led me to wanting to do this. And one of the things you said in that video was that you had access to Cael Sanderson through the ownership group, and you were thinking about reaching out. Now, I've heard that you since did reach out, and I believe you hung out with him last year, right?
Well, I don't know if you call if you call it hanging out, but yeah, Cael was kind enough to invite me to just spend some time with him and his staff. I think it was just prior last season to their prior to the NCAA's, in fact. So it was, most of the hay was in the barn, if you can call it that at that point. So it was just really cool to spend some time. Just it was me more so being a sponge
Yeah.
than really sharing of ideas because I don't want to. It wasn't me really sharing ideas. It was more of me asking questions. I mean, he's been so successful at multiple spots and as a wrestler and now as a coach and building a program, not only building a program, but being able to sustain success.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of other really, really great coaches out there. And I just wanted to see how he did it really.
What do you think your biggest takeaway from that time with him was? And there's a
Yeah.
lot to take away. I mean,
Oh,
every
man.
time I get to spend time around him, I was just down there a month ago, and in between practice, I sat there in his office for a couple hours. And like you said, he asks me a lot of questions about marketing and branding and that stuff. He's been a client for 10 plus years, but I feel like it's so much more me just trying to absorb as much as I can. I'm curious of what do you think one of like the biggest takeaways was?
Yeah, I think surprisingly enough, it was rather simple, and it was really that, um, the importance or the value in taking time for yourself, to make sure that you're right, as a leader,
Yeah.
and that's true with our families. It's also true with our teams in this case, and so sometimes that's hard to do as leaders because you feel you don't, at least I do, I feel guilty sometimes,
Yeah.
taking time away. But if you're not right, then we drive the temperature of the room, and so it's important that we're right.
Yeah, it's super important. I mean, I've talked about that, and I've had wrestlers come on here and coaches come on here who said the same thing. That man, you gotta give place to the rest. So much happens during that time of rest. Or if you're going 18 hours a day, or 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day, whatever it is, and you're not giving place to rest and giving place to God to work when you rest, you can burn out so fast. And I'm curious, throughout your wrestling career, you've said that you kind of hit the reset button and you prevented more of that burnout from happening and you turned that around. And now as an NFL coach, you've been with the Eagles, the Panthers, and now with the Bills. How have you continued to build your career and not get burnt out? And another thing, right? Like you got kind of burnt out in wrestling. What did you take away from that rest and all that you learned for football now?
Yeah, great question. I think that there's certainly a pull both directions in the dichotomy of work ethic. And if you're a wrestler or you have wrestling in your background, you've probably worked or developed a pretty substantial work ethic. And so, but there's got to be a balance there between that and getting the rest. And so to your point, that's where I got burned out in wrestling when I was younger. And then in my coaching career, when I was in Philadelphia with the Eagles, we would sleep in the office 2 nights a week and get up early. So it wasn't sleeping. When I say sleep in the office, it wasn't getting 8 hours of sleep and what have
Yeah.
you. But yeah, it was some tough stuff, man. I mean, quick turnarounds from the night to the morning, and so I got a little bit burnt out there. But I've since learned how important rest is, and recovery and nutrition and all those types of things. Again, just getting your your mind in the right space, I think, is huge. And so getting your workouts, getting your rest, eating right, spending time in the Bible, spending time in prayer is huge for me.
Yeah, no, it is for me too. And it's funny because I was just going to ask you too. When you've made so many different decisions in your life, whether it's to transfer to LaSalle, whether it's to go to play football in college and to be a coach and to have different seasons. And I was going to ask you, what helps you make those decisions? Is it prayer? Is it conviction? Is it what helps you go from one thing to the next? And you have a potential long career still left. And as a Bills fan, I'm hoping it stays here in Buffalo. But what is that process like to kind of, like you said, I think when you running my company for 12 years now, there's a lot of pull from clients that will almost make you want to feel guilty. If you're not there at their beck and call, there's some guilt. And you have to really learn how to separate the two. And I'm curious if that's how you've, gotten, it seems like, and this is completely from an outsider's perspective, it seems like you're happier at each job you take. It seems like you're now happier than you were at Carolina or Philly. And obviously you're the head coach now. So, it's easy to say that. But have all those life lessons led to that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, this is a grind, and it's as they say, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
I've made a lot of mistakes over my career, both personally and professionally, just from a standpoint of, just the journey that you go through. And I think there's no substitute for experience. And, we embrace in Buffalo with the Bills, we embrace that mindset, that growth mindset of Kaizen and continual self-improvement. And so that's been the journey for me is again, growing personally, growing professionally. I started with my parents and my brother. I was raised with great support, and that continues to this day. And that's been a big help, as well as my relationship with God and my faith. And then my immediate family now, I spend a lot of time with them, and I'm trying to develop some hobbies because it's been work, and it's been raising my family and leading my family, hopefully. And so I've tried to kind of rediscover some hobbies during these last few months here.
Yeah, I started playing the piano 3 years ago or 4 years ago, maybe now. And it was the same thing. It was kind of a disconnect. Has your faith always been an important part of your career?
Yeah, 100% for sure. Yeah, it's God has a plan, and there's days where things seem easier than others, and then there's those tough days. And so, I just have learned over the course of my career and really my life to this point, that the one steadying aspect of my life is God. And whether we win or lose, or whether I've done things right or I've made mistakes, he's the one person that's always been there for me, including my family as well. But he's just provided so much that I'm extremely grateful for what I have.
Amen. So last wrestling question here, and then we'll kind of close with one Bills question. Are you still following wrestling? Like, are you watching NCAAs? How into it do you still get?
Oh yeah, man. Come on now. I love it. I love, my wife knows when the NCAAs are on, she'll usually, in our old house, she would just stay upstairs and do what she was doing with, fold laundry or whatever. And she'd come downstairs and I'm an intense guy, right? I got that from wrestling, but I'm listening to the interviews after the finals matches and watching the emotions on the TV screen. Man, there's no other sport that is even close to that. And because the hard work, the amount of work that these people have put in to get to where they got to climb that mountain. Yeah. And to see these wrestlers come off the mat and jump into the arms of their coaches and their families, man, I get emotional. And so my wife came down one time and she said, "Hey, you all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I was tearing up. That's real. I mean, that's the real part of wrestling that I think is such a part of life. So anytime I meet a wrestler, or someone that's wrestled, man, it's just a common bond.
Yeah. Do you have any favorites that you like watching right now?
In terms of the guys wrestling?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many good young wrestlers out there. I was excited to watch the NCAAs this year. And I don't know everyone's names. I because of my job, I haven't been able to follow everything. But I think the wrestler at Wisconsin is that Seth? Is that
Seth Gross? Yep, he was just on here on Friday on the podcast.
Oh yeah. So watching his journey, knowing that he transferred, and I think he's with Coach Bono now at Wisconsin, and obviously watching the Penn State wrestlers. And so I've just so many great matches over the years, and those upsets. I think one of the cool things about, I know as a wrestler, I hated upsets because you never wanted to be a part of them really, unless you were the underdog. But when you're at those tournaments, one of the memories I have is when you're at the tournaments and it's a big arena and you hear the crowd start to go crazy. And then you're the quarterfinals, maybe the semis. Something big is happening, and usually it's not the guy that was expected to winning. It's usually some form of someone hit a big time move or an upset's about to happen. So that part I love.
It's the best. As a Penn State fan, I think it was maybe 3 years ago now when Kyle Connell upset Colin Moore at Ohio State. The Penn State fans went nuts, and he was a Kent State wrestler who wasn't expected to do anything close to that. And yeah, there's nothing like that tournament. But I know our time here is winding down. So last thing before I let you go, the 2020 NFL season hopefully coming up here soon. Buddy of mine, actually, we're just talking today. We're so excited. We think we're going to buy some club season tickets because we're like, man, last year was so exciting. It wasn't the end anybody wanted. It wasn't the end you wanted, the players, Bills Mafia. None of us wanted that. What are your thoughts heading into this 2020 season? How excited are you?
Yeah, we're extremely excited, like we are every year. But we feel like, we've taken another step this off season. I can tell you from the minute last season ended, we've been all eyes and all of our focus on this season, trying to make sure that we are taking another step, like I mentioned, and we have a lot of runway in front of us. So there's a lot of work between now and the time we kick it off. So, hey, everyone starts, 0-0, and that's the real part of this. Even though we feel like we've improved our football team, our players have been extremely, extremely engaged in these virtual off-season meetings and workouts that we're having, which is a credit to them. But having said all of that, we've got a lot of work to do, and so no one's going to just roll over for us. We've got to put the time and the work in.
Yeah, it's going to be a good season for sure. So I'm excited. And listen, thank you so much for taking some time today and joining the podcast. I know I enjoyed this, and I'm sure many, many, many listeners are enjoying this. So thank you again for taking some time for us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Justin. Best of luck. Can't wait to continue to follow you in your career.
Thanks, man. I'm sure we'll run into each other at training camp or one of the games. I'm probably not a good guy to speak to the team, but if Jordan or somebody's speaking, I'll probably be like next to him.
You're more than welcome anytime.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you again, man. All right. See ya.
And the beat goes on.